Hello, everybody. Thanks again for being on this podcast today. I'm with Shannon. We are working for Rin Mexico, and today we are going to do a beautiful interview with our very loyal lawyer, Zaira. And we're going to talk about everything that you need to know if you're looking to purchase a property here in Cabo and all the little things that you may not heard or you want to know about purchasing a property in Cabo. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Shannon Plager, and I'm an agent with RE Mexico, and I'm happy to be here answering questions and talking about real estate.
So you guys are going to answer the questions, and I'm going to make them?
Well, actually not. It's the other way around, but yeah, Zaira.
Just messing with you guys. I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you for always having me. It's a pleasure to answer questions for our clients, and well, let's get this rolling.
We're gonna try to, make this podcast as interesting and not to focus on the things that everybody mostly talk about, and we think that everybody talks in other podcasts. So we try to focus on the things that other people don't talk as much.
Right.
Okay. For a beginner, probably like the first thing that you may have heard as a buyer here is the Fideicomiso, and which is something that everybody talks about, so we're not going to focus that much on that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you want just to share something about the Fideicomiso, so we can just go along and...
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I think, as you said, at this point, a lot of people already knows what a Fideicomiso is. At a lack of a better way to say it, it's the bank lending their name, so a foreigner can acquire a property in Mexico. Pretty much for them to administer it, the bank has no other role in the Fideicomiso than to administer the property. The expenses, the taxes, the use, the exploitment, the enjoyment, of course, of the property, everything is for the foreigner that bought the property. That is in essence the Fideicomiso. We all know how much does it cost. In average, it's a setup of $2,500 depending on the bank. It has an average duration through a permit of 50 years.
So after this 50 year, my property is gone?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. No, the property is not gone. We carry out a administrative process merely to renew the permit, and we can do this on lapses of 50 years or 50 years or 50 years until the property passes to another member of the family, or the trust is extinguished for a sale to a Mexican corporation, or wherever destination you want to give to the property.
At any point during that 50 years, they can renew it, change the terms of it, or whatever they like, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, if you guys bought a property together, and at some point you decide that it doesn't work anymore, or Francesco is in need of selling the property or something, he can assign the rights of whichever percentage that he has of the property to you or to whoever he wants. Or if you guys decide that the partnership that you had on the property doesn't work on a 50-50 anymore, and you want to do...
That's probably likely.
Yeah, probably like it. And you want to be 70-30, we can change that. If Shannon appoints his Mexican girlfriend and decides that, well, that doesn't work for me anymore, I broke up, you can change the beneficiary in the event of decease. If you want to sell the property, you can assign the rights. There's a number of things that you can change in a Fideicomiso before those 50 years expire.
The assignment of beneficiaries, I think, is an important factor, too, because, I don't have kids, but if, I were to buy a property now, single, no kids, but, 10 years down the road, I have kids, might want to add them as the beneficiaries, just so everything is, cut and dry and everything's laid out.
It's very important that you mentioned that. A lot of people decide not to put a beneficiary precisely because what you're saying. I've had a number of clients that, for a number of reasons, decide that they're going to be the only beneficiaries, the main beneficiaries of the Fideicomiso, and doesn't appoint someone to inherit the property at their decease. I strongly recommend and that the clients always leave a beneficiary. That there is no restriction at all of who can be the beneficiary. It can be your mom, it can be any relative, a friend. It doesn't matter the nationality of the person. It can be a Mexican even. I just recently, I'm signing a title on Monday in which the beneficiary is going to be the Mexican girlfriend of a foreign client. So when you don't do that, you are getting the property in a risk of having a big process to be recognized. While if you do appoint it, pretty painless process to recognize a new beneficiary of the property.
Right, and that process is correct me if I'm wrong. That process is like, say the primary owner of the Fideicomiso passes away, and then the next up is his kids. What process do the kids have to get themselves recognized? Just to notify the government that the original owner has passed, that the information?
Pretty much. It's pretty painless. The process is going to change a bit depending on the bank that is holding the Fideicomiso, but generally speaking, all of them have the same process. First, we need to make aware the bank that the main beneficiary has passed away. How do we do that? With the certificate, the death certificate. If the person died abroad, we're going to need the death certificate to be apostille. Thank you. And once in Mexico, translate the beneficiary in the event of decease that it's recorded on the title. This is very important. If it's not on the title, we're going to have to do a very different, lengthy, painful process. But if not, it's just the death certificate, apostille, translated in Mexico, and a letter of instruction to the bank saying, hey, I'm the substitute beneficiary of this Fideicomiso that was in this person's name, and I want to recognize myself using this notary.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I've had a client in the past that they didn't know any of this process before they came to us. And so their father died, they inherited this property that they didn't really know anything about. They were trying to sell it without notifying the government because they didn't know any better. And it's just a long process. It was a process to get that done because they didn't know any better and they didn't do it until they talked to us.
There's a lot of, I think this is very important that you're mentioning this. The one thing that causes unnecessary struggle in real estate transactions, it's precisely the lack of knowledge on these things. So I really appreciate professionals like you guys that are interested in always learning how to advise better your clients, because we're avoiding as a team problems for the buyers.
Yeah, no, we are actually more interested to know which are the other ways that a foreigner can acquire a property here, mostly if he's an investor. What would you recommend?
This is a tough one because generally I would say it's a case-by-case scenario, depending on what's the investment plan that they have. Is it a short-term investment? Is it a long-term investment? What type of where does the funds come for the purchase of the property? So it is important to consider all factors, but generally speaking, if we're gonna do an investment of multiple properties, that is when, for me, it makes sense to not take the option of the Fideicomiso that is the most common one, but instead of that, doing a Mexican corporation. Difficult, it isn't difficult. Lengthy, it is not that lengthy. It has more steps than the Fideicomiso, of course. It requires different maintenance. It's important to remember that in the Fideicomiso, pretty much we just pay the annual fee on a yearly basis and the property tax of the property. But in a corporation, you have to deal
with an accountant.
Exactly. So it's a business.
It's a business, yeah, exactly. It's not just owning like a second home, but you're dealing with a business. Totally. So
yeah, you need to keep an accountancy on a monthly basis. You need to keep an accountancy, your annual filings. It also has some benefits. It's not all bad, like, oh, can I do more work? No. We also have a lot of benefits that normally we wouldn't have in a Fideicomiso, like the deductions that you can do on the capital gains over the income that you receive from the properties that you're using. The use of the property is also very important to consider. Is it going to be a part-time home and a part-time investment? Is it going to be exclusively vacational rentals? Is it going to be long-term rentals? All those things matter when it comes to decide what's the best structure, vehicle for a foreigner to acquire property in Mexico. So
when it comes to buy, let's say, one investment property, would you recommend to set up a Mexican corporation, or would you do a Fideicomiso? If I was in that position, personally, I would do a Fideicomiso. But it definitely depends on my mid-long-term plan on the investment. If my plan is just to get one property and use it during the winter to escape from cold weather and rent it during the summer months because profit, I think I would stay with a Fideicomiso. It gives you the benefit of not
having to worry too much about accountancy. Several digital platforms pretty much do automatically
they tax you automatically.
The tax deductions up to a certain limit that we can talk on a different episode of this. I think I would stay with a fideicomiso. If it's an investment that you're thinking in keeping for some time, it can also allow you, depending on the value of the property, to get a residency that comes with additional benefits in case you decide to sell the property, like exempting a good chunk of capital gains, like taking it from a surface perspective. I think it would be to do a fideicomiso if it's just one property.
Well, what do you suggest?
The answer is take your advice.
Yeah. And now let's talk about another topic that is very common and majority of the people are familiarized with, but we can discuss some things that they may have not heard. When it comes to close on a property, what is the process like and what they have to be aware of?
Again, I love your tricky questions. There's no simple answer to those questions because, again, it depends on a number of factors. What kind of seller do you have? Is it a Mexican? Is it a Mexican corporation with no foreigners? Is it a Mexican corporation with foreigners? Is it a foreigner that already has a fideicomiso? And who's the buyer? Is it one or several individuals? Is it going to be a foreign corporation? Is it going to be a Mexican corporation? It depends a lot, but let's talk about the generally speaking, and maybe give you like a couple of tips and tricks on what to look like in the specific scenarios. Closing depends on what you call closing. Closing for me, depending on when you involve me in the transaction, can be from the due diligence of the property, reviewing that the title is at the name of the person that it says that it's selling you, that the property taxes are up to date, that the fideicomiso fees are up to date, that there's no liens on the property, executing the agreement that it's going to bind you with your seller, buyer-seller.
And usually like the due diligence is a period that lasts for like a week. Normally,
a week,
little longer.
2 weeks. Yeah, I think it depends also on the nature of the property that you're getting. If it's pre-construction, really the only thing that we have to check it's licenses and the title. But if we're talking to a property that has been built for like 10 years, there's more things to check. I would suggest keeping a number of contingencies that I'm pretty sure you guys are familiarized with, an inspection by a certified inspector to see if there is anything that we should add as a punch list for repairs, or renegotiate the price of the property with your seller. If we're talking about, for example, a lot of raw land,
specifically in some of the areas that are on the Pacific Coast and on the Sea of Cortez area, it's super recommended to do a survey on the land, because the boundaries has been done when GPS was not available. And you may find some surprises.
Yeah, so the property line that they say might be a little over here when it's actually here.
A little over here, like on the ocean, we've seen that.
They were making these boundaries with some pale, like some boots. So
there's actually like a historic reason for that. In Mexico, in several parts of Mexico, we used to do the cartography based on the natural elements that we had on the land. So let's say that, okay, Shannon, my property starts in this stone heart shape.
Up to that cactus, yeah. And so like 30 years later, we are trying to sell the property and the cactus is not there. And the stone doesn't have a heart shape anymore. So, and when the government started trying to formalize those things, they did desk cartography. That's how people call it. They didn't go to verify the things in physical. They just took those points, those natural points, and tried to do exactly the same to set the lines and boundaries of the properties. Which, of course, as you said, it's problematic now. Now we have very sophisticated systems of cartography and topography. It is extremely advisable that whenever you're getting a piece of raw land, do it's mandatory.
Do an alignment. Request an alignment, check the boundaries, make sure that you're buying the square meters that you're buying, make sure that you're not buying property that it's on your neighbor's land. avoid problems. That's it's always going to be a must, and I'm always going to recommend that it's one of the contingencies for raw land purchases.
Yeah, doing something like that up front is going to save a lot of headaches down the road when you try to build on it, put your wall up, and it's actually 10 feet on your neighbor's property or something like that.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Exactly.
Right? So, yeah, I think it's super important. I've seen a number of people. I have currently a couple of clients that you know about, that they have severe issues with the boundaries of the property. We're not talking about a couple of meters here, a couple of meters there. No, we're talking about hectares of difference. So it is extremely important, especially in those cases that we do these type of things. It's an additional expense. Yeah. Does it take a bit more time? Also, yeah. Is it gonna save you headaches, like Shannon said? Of course. And I think a lot.
Yeah.
And I think your peace of mind as a foreign buyer in a foreign country, it's everything.
Zyder, what else is entailed with the due diligence period?
Well, it's in essence what I just told you guys, like the contingencies depending on the type of property that you're getting. Contingencies, again, just recapping, can be an alignment, can be an inspection, can be the legal review of documents, and there might be some special things depending on each transaction, but that's pretty much it. From there, we go to the execution of the contract. You guys always enter a letter of intent or an offer to purchase. My job is to take all those negotiations that you guys did and the results of the contingencies and put it on a contract with a bit more detail. Who picks the notary? What's the bank? Which date are we using to close? Is our penalties going to be paid in the event of breach of one or another party? Are we using an escrow company for holding the money? Who pays the commissions? Who pays for the technical documentation? All that stuff should be yes or yes on a promissory contract, either for a purchase sale, a constitution of a Fideicomiso, an assignment of rights, an extinguishment of a Fideicomiso, pretty much all that.
So how long does this whole process take, more or less? Well, average. Because it's case by case, I know. So
yeah, I love that answer, right? So the due diligence, it's a couple of weeks, including the execution of the contract. From there, if we're talking about pre-construction, it depends on how long the property is going to be. It's going to take for it to be ready, and especially more than the construction, how long is the paperwork for the property to be ready? Most properties here in Cabo, apartments are subject to a condo regime. That it's their life in community. For us to be able to carry out the closing, we should have the condo regime registered. Answering your question, that's like pretty much when we can start working on paperwork on pre-construction. But in raw land and already houses that are already in inventory, it's relatively simple. It takes 4 to 6 weeks. When did that time start counting? From the moment that a title is registered, from the moment that the condo regime is registered, from the moment that I have the cadastral manifestation of a new building, of a new house, if that's the type of deal that you enter to. But the closing from that moment, it takes 4 to 6 weeks. Why is it a bit of a difference between the time that it takes? Because of the bank. Some banks are a bit more bureaucratic and require more forms, and also on the technical documentation. And
you mentioned that during pre-construction, the closing time is determined by when the building is actually going to be delivered. So that could be a month from now, that could be a year from now.
That could be 2 years from now.
Yeah, whatever the time frame is to build the building. But what happens if I buy a property that's going to be delivered 1 year from now, and 6 months in the future I decide, this isn't for me, I want to sell this property?
It is a great question. It has been a trend recently on this type of things. A number of people entered pre-construction agreements, and economy is bad everywhere. Mm-hmm. And life continuously puts us in situations where we need to take different decisions, right? So in the contracts, and that's the importance of having someone on your side checking, in the contracts with the developer, you should have someone on your corner checking for you to have let's say an exit clause. It's not an exit per se because you cannot just rescind the agreement. You're going to be penalized, yes or yes.
Yeah.
Normally in the contract, there's a clause of assignment of rights in which the developer or the seller allows you to assign your rights contracted in that agreement and pass them to someone else. Typically, there is like a small fee that they charge for administrative expenses. It's something between 1% to 3% for what we've seen here, but that is completely at the developer's choice.
1-3% of the total price or
Of
of
the
the
total price.
Okay.
What does this make? That if I bought a property and I don't have the money anymore to pay it, and my delivery is not going to be until a year, and I want to sell the property to a friend that is in the capacity to take those obligations for me, I can notify the seller and say, hey, I am not in the capacity to buy anymore, but I want to assign the rights of this contract as it is to this person. And you can do that. You can you accredit the amounts that you already paid on the property to this person, or get like a reimbursement from them in the way that you decide to. And the developer should be, let's call present in the contract. It should appear in the contract to agree and acknowledge who is the new buyer.
Yeah.
And that way you don't have a big loss on the property. You will just carry out the administrative expenses on it.
And one thing I've seen with some clients down here when they've bought a pre-construction condo and then it says that the condo is going to be delivered on March 1st. And then 6 months later, it's still being under construction. And
I've never seen it.
I don't like your question, Shannon.
Okay. Well, we can not do that one.
I'm kidding. So yeah, go ahead, please.
So then, it's not being delivered on time, and people are getting nervous because, but they said that they're going to have a house then, but they don't. So what are their options that they can do in that situation?
So you're going to say that I say exactly the same thing on every answer, on every question, but your contract should have like all these things considered. Mm-hmm. What is the most common thing that we see on the contracts? The developer puts a penalty that more than a penalty, it's an interest, a percentage of interest in the event of late delivery. Because if we are very realistic, Baja, it's pretty much an island. It's a peninsula, but it's pretty much an island. So there may be, and there is a number of issues when it comes to the chain supply of materials. If, for example, the ferry from Mazatlan stops working or has a malfunction, well, you don't have materials to build until that thing is it's fixed, So a number of things can happen. The contract mentions the late penalty delivery, that it's a small interest. It also normally developers have a grace period in which they are allowed to not deliver without a penalty, precisely because these things happen. And there's also the clause of force majeure or acts of God, because they have no control over what's going to happen on the materials, what's going to happen on the permits, what happens if, like in 2020, we have another pandemic, and the world stops. Yeah. So all those things are out of our control. Mm-hmm. But what resources do you have? Like, the resources that you have are the resources that you have on your contract. So if there is a percentage for late penalty, you're going to have some credit in your favor at the end. If you have a monthly penalty, well, same thing. And there are some contracts and some developers that allows to have a clause that allows the buyer to exit the contract after a certain time of delay. So let's say that the contract that you executed with a developer said that your property should be ready for January 2025. The developer gave himself 3 months of extension period. So technically speaking, we have February, March, April to have the delivery with no penalty. But also you have, a 3% interest in your favor for any month of delay or any year of delay. But you don't want to stay and wait for 1 to 3 years and get a 3, 6, 9% discount for the delay. In a lot of cases, and that's the importance of having someone reviewing the contract for you, you can request this exit clause. After 6 months of delay past the extension period, I can exit this and have a reimbursement, not be penalized, not penalizing the seller, or pretty much decide the conditions that you want to do or put in the contract.
So let's say, all of these situations may happen and you technically want to get your money back. Let's say we are working with a very difficult developer. What is the process to actually get this money back? I know it's a very complicated question, but like people comes to a point that they really want their money back. So what's the way to do it?
I am a strong believer that we can negotiate with people. We're humans at the end of the day, and there's a number of problems that we can solve amicably. There's a saying in Mexico that it's better to have a bad deal than a good fight, and that is true. Not encouraging to anyone to take anything that they don't want, but it's a reality in our country. But what resources do you have if a negotiation fails? There's essentially two big options. There's more, but I think the two most common ones are taking a civil process that takes a long time. Judicial system in Mexico is efficient in most cases, but it's lengthy. So if you take that route, we're going to be talking in a best case scenario of at least a year. So if you don't have the time, if you don't want to do that, well, it's tricky. The other option that you have is this instant that has become pretty famous over the last couple of years, called Profeco.
Perfect.
That it's an instant that protects the consumer. That is pretty much the name in Spanish, La Procuraduría de la ¿qué? Profeco, Procuraduría Federal del Consumidor. What? That this system pretty much does that. You have a contract, you have a certain amount of terms and conditions that should be met, and their work is to try to enforce it. Try, it's the key word, because Profeco is, at the end of the day, an administrative institution. They're gonna issue penalties, they're gonna issue recommendations, and they're gonna list in a blacklist of developers, the people that doesn't comply with what they offer. I don't know if you guys remember, but last year it was like a big thing, this Mexican norm for real estate agencies that pretty much turned the world upside down and forced everyone to register their formats, offer to purchase, listing agreements, promissory contracts, and that is all in the aim to protect the client. Mm-hmm. That is the resource that has been the most effective right now to get a penalty or to get a reimbursement done, or in general.
It's actually very important. Sorry to interrupt you, but if you're dealing with a developer or whichever contract here in Mexico, always verify that it's registered with the Profeco. That is a key point to make sure that you're not going into future trouble.
And yeah, it's very important. Not all the developers have their contracts registered, because as of now it is not mandatory. It is a suggestion. It is like a strong suggestion for the government. And of course, it talks very well from a developer that they are complying with all those things. I'm pretty sure that in a short term, this is going to be mandatory. Mm-hmm. So this is just a matter of time. But for now, not everyone's going to be registered. Not everyone's forced to be registered. But definitely, it's like a green flag to have a developer that has a contract registered, because they are in the spotlight of the Profeco, and they know that if they fail, they're going to be penalized.
So, Zaire, in the U.S., we have lots of different ways to secure funding to buy a house, like a HELOC, you can do a 401k, IRA, lots of different things like personal credit, and tons of different stuff in the U.S. What kind of financing options would an American buyer have in Mexico to buy a property?
Well, actually, some of the options that you mentioned can be used to buy property in Mexico. There is a specific group, there are several ways to get a financing in Mexico. We can do a from the classic things like a bank financing or a financing company, which for foreigners I really wouldn't recommend. Especially for Americans, I think you can help me with that comparison of interest rates. In Mexico, for foreigners, it's pretty high. We're talking somewhere between 11 to 12% this year.
Yeah, that's about people. It's about double. People in the U.S. are complaining that, oh my God, 5% is too much. 11, 12.
That is too much.
That's quite a bit of money.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. For some people it works. For some people it works in order to deduct this interest, especially the ones that has corporations that needs to pay taxes. So it's not precisely bad, but it's not the option that I would go initially if I was a foreigner.
It's not as flexible or robust as we'd have in the U.S. Like if you can't, you don't have as much leeway in your interest rates and all that for what you're looking at. And
also the term of the financing. A lot of the financings in companies in Mexico for foreigners specifically don't give you like such a big term as the 30 years that you would have in the U.S. or that I would have as a Mexican with a bank or a financing.
Because a lot of what I've seen has been like 10, 15 years, something like that, which it can be, I think, confusing to a lot of times to an American buyer who's, we're used to, 30-year loan, like financing 80% of it or something like that, which I don't think we have as flexible of an option for that.
Definitely no. Also, like talking about the down payment, you talk about financing 80% of the value of the property. Here it's important to consider two factors. One, the time. They're not going to give you, a lot of the financing companies, specifically talking about Mexican banks and financing companies, because we have some other options that we're going to talk about soon. But talking about those two options in specific, a lot of them are not going to give you 30 years. I think the tops that I've seen, it's 20. And it's the other factor that it's super important when it comes to requesting, applying for those financings. It's the value of the property. So a lot of the financing companies for foreigners, that the target is foreigners, doesn't lend money if you don't have a certain value of the property. Normally from $250,000 up, typically $300,000. For the banks in specific, you should have a good credit score in Mexico, which means that you should be a Mexican resident with your Mexican tax ID and comply with all those requirements. So it's not the easiest option for foreigners to apply. It's also probably not the most beneficial when it comes to the rates for the interest. Which other options do we have? There are cross-border loan companies that are companies set in the United States, in Canada, that are set specifically to loan money for purchases of properties in Mexico.
Or in Mexico.
Yeah.
And for sure, this isn't to say that, the financing options in Mexico are bad or anything like that, but as a lot of things we've been talking about, it's really a case-by-case basis. It can be a really good option for certain buyers, but maybe not for everybody.
Yeah, maybe not the best option for everybody. But there's some other options that they can actually apply. Some things that foreigners are way more familiarized, like, for example, personal credits in the United States, your HELOC that you just mentioned. You can also use your retirement plan in Canada, the RRSP or the 401k, a self-directed IRA to get a property in Mexico. That it's more on the terms that you are used to in your country of origin, your currency, your everything. So it's things that I think, in my opinion, as a Mexican, are things easier to apply, are options easier to manage. Are rates that you're way more used to. But if that also doesn't work for you, we have another couple of options. We have developer financing and we have seller's financing. It kind of sounds the same. It isn't. In one, we're talking about specifically pre-construction, in which we have this payment schedule that can be normally 35% of the purchase price, and depending on how long the property is going to take to be built, or if there is some more time available, they can give you They can give you financing for 5, 7, 10 years, and the interest rate it's not as bad.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not very high. Yeah.
It's not high.
It's very convenient.
Yeah.
And it's a great sign to buy in those developments because it means that they don't need
funds.
your money. They don't need your money to build.
They have the capital already there to build, and then I think something like that is a really good option for a buyer. Like if, say, I have a budget of $500,000, but I fall in love with a house that's $700,000. That developer financing option can give you that extra $200,000 to get you in the house that you really, really like.
Yeah, it's actually one of the best options, and that is pretty much the same thing as the seller finance. The only difference is that it's a personal financing through the seller that already owns that place, not the developer like constructing that building.
Well, as you were mentioning the seller financing, which are the terms that are, let's say, registered from the law here in Mexico for doing this seller financing? So it's not like the seller can give you like 30 years, right?
Right. Well, it depends. It really depends. Like this, in specific, the seller financing, I find super interesting because it's your negotiation with your seller. There are figures that I think personally that we're not exploiting that much and that we should in order to protect buyer and seller and keep this healthy relationship during the financing. So can it be 30 years? Yeah, if the seller agrees. It can be 5, 10 to whatever you want. And since we're talking about foreigners and how do I protect you, I don't know if you guys, I'm pretty sure that I mentioned to you at some point in the past, but I don't know if you guys remember the figure of the guarantee Fideicomiso or the guaranteed interest.
Yeah, you may have.
Yeah?
Okay.
We
talked about it.
It's okay. We can talk about it. Just to refresh a bit of the terms of that. It's pretty much the same thing. It's a Fideicomiso. You request a permit. You use to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. You use a fiduciary bank. What's the difference? So in a typical Fideicomiso, we have the main beneficiary and the beneficiary on the event of decease. Mm-hmm. In the guarantee Fideicomiso, we're going to have 3 sets of beneficiaries. The first main beneficiary, the secondary main beneficiary, and the beneficiary in the event of decease. Who's going to be who? Your seller, the person that is giving the finance, it's the financing, it's going to be the first main beneficiary. Why? Because he should be guaranteed that you are going to pay. And if you don't pay, well, things happen. We have to protect that investment. But that also allows you, the buyer, to be the second main beneficiary. Mm. You have a title. You're not like in a limbo on a piece of paper, a private piece of paper between people. I would like to believe that people act in good faith, but I always rather have things in writing that I can refer to, especially if they are formal documents, recorded documents. Okay. And of course, you have the same as the as your beneficiary in the event of decease. So that is pretty much it. And the only thing that changes is that as soon as the financing is paid in full, we remove that first beneficiary and your trust is exactly the same as a regular Fideicomiso. So that gives certainty to the seller that they have a document that accredits, yes, I am lending him money, not lending him money, but you get it. And there's normally this reversion clause that if you don't pay, you buyer don't pay a number of consecutive payments, you are in danger of losing the property. All the terms, all the conditions are customized. You can decide if you want to do this clause to be applicable after 3 consecutive missing payments, or 5, or 10, or 1.
So negotiable.
It's negotiable. And there's a number of institutions that does this. It's not that much expensive, and I think it's well worth to have all the parties in the property protected in case of anything.
So as you were mentioning about this Fideicomiso de Garantía, so how more expensive can it be than the regular Fideicomiso?
It's not that much expensive. Like it's in average $500 to $800 toward the closing cost. Okay. And also important to consider that we need to execute a second deed to remove the seller from the title. But it really doesn't affect that much the budget for closing.
Okay.
Okay. You mentioned closing costs, like of course setting up the Fideicomiso, whichever one you do, the Untitled or the other one, they're going to have their fees to it. But what other fees could we expect to see in the closing costs? Of course, there's something else involved though.
Well, a lot of things, yeah. So I think we normally in our company we do an estimate of closing costs, and we make you a breakdown for sections, because our sections of payments that we do, fees and expenses for the Fideicomiso, that as mentioned, we need to request a permit, there's an acceptance fee and an annual fee. In average, that shouldn't be more than $2,300 to $2,500 in a regular Fideicomiso. If you're doing a guarantee one, well, we increase the $500 to $800 depending on the bank. The next set of documents, the next set of expenses, it's the technical documentation. What is that? It's all the documents that we need to prepare preliminary to the closing. The appraisal, certificates of no debt of property tax, of water, of HOA, the certificate of no liens, everything that says, hey, the property, it's up to date on their payments and ready to be transferred to another person. And we have then the public registry rights, and this very particular tax that it's always a topic of conversation with the clients, that we know as ISABI, in Spanish, the Impuesto sobre Adquisición de Bienes Inmuebles, pretty much the acquisition tax. And this, in the state of Baja California Sur, when it's a purchase, it's a 2% of the value of the property that you're recording in pesos. Mm-hmm. Very important to mention, guys, is in pesos. We pay the taxes in pesos. So even though I give you the budget for your closing in US dollars, the last chunk of things that I pay to the notary are those two items. Why? Because it depends directly on the exchange rate of the day that we close the property. Mm-hmm. And in order for us not to create additional expenses on you, that is the last thing that we pay. Property tax and public registry rights. And last but not least, we have 3 sets of fees depending on the transaction. One of them is optional, but they very used. We have legal fees, notary fees, and escrow fee. The escrow fee, of course, if you decide to use an escrow provider. If you decide not to, well, you save that amount. It's not I think all the escrow providers charge kind of the same, something like 6 to 700 US dollars.
Yeah, in comparison to the purchase price and all that, $600 or $700.
It's nothing, and it's a good way to protect your transaction.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it just makes the transaction process easier, because we use a lot of the escrow company we use is out of Texas, so it makes American buyers, it's more comfortable seeing that.
So. Yeah, it's easier. First, the international wires can be painful. Yeah. The Mexican information that we use on the banks is a bit different than the ones that you have in the U.S. and Canada. So, an escrow company facilitates that, because you do a domestic wire instead of an international one.
And you mentioned that the price is recorded at whatever the peso exchange rate is that day. So how does that work with capital gains and all that? Like 10 years from now, when I sell it and the property tax, like the exchange rate is a different rate. It's to do with the peso rate that day versus 10 years from now, right?
I love you guys. You love asking me tough questions.
Well, that's why you're here. Because we know you're really smart and you know the answers to these questions.
Well, yeah, I guess.
You're really good.
Okay, so capital gains, it's a topic that we strongly recommend the sellers to check before listing, so there's no surprises, or that you can prevent and prepare for deductions, for even in setting the price that you're going to list the property. Capital gains in Mexico has a bit of a complicated formula. We take the purchase price in pesos. So let's say you bought 2015, and you bought a property in 5 million pesos, and you want to sell it in 2024 in 8 million pesos. So the first thing is to deduct the acquisition value, your 5 million pesos, to the amount that you're gonna receive. So we have now the gain, 3 million pesos. Over that gain, we need to update and deduct the inflation in accordance to the Mexican tax authorities. What amount is that? Well, it will depend on how many years have passed since you acquired and from the time that you sell. That doesn't mean that your property is worth less. Not at all. Especially not here in Cabo, where the properties increase value, yes or yes. But it's important to consider that factor in the formula. And then, depending on the amount that you have of the gain, the Mexican tax authorities set this table in which we use a specific percentage depending on the gain for the calculation of those taxes. And from those taxes, we can apply a number of deductions, the real estate commissions, any improvements that you have on a property that have a way to demonstrate it. So it's a factura, the Mexican invoice. There are another couple of strategies that we can use to help the sellers make that calculation and make sure that they're selling to a fair price, that they're actually receiving a gain, because in some cases I've seen no gain or little to no gain. So yeah, that it's important to validate not only with your lawyer, but with the notary that it's going to carry out the transaction, because at the end of the day, they are joint responsibles for the payment of capital gains. So if the calculation is wrong, the notary is also responsible along with the seller to cover that amount. So very, very, very important to check that information beforehand. Before even listing the property, it would be like the best time to do that.
Right. Yeah. Because that's you don't want to have unexpected expenses like that. And like I had a client who their parents bought the house 30 years ago when the exchange rate was totally different. The inflation rate was, I'm sure, was a lot different then, and they didn't know what they were doing. And so, before they came, they didn't do that. Yeah,
and you're mentioning a very good point in there, because I don't know if you guys know, but in Mexico we had a change in the currency. The Mexican peso lost a couple of zeros in 1993. So properties that were bought before that had a very different amount. You're going to see properties that were bought for 500 pesos.
Yeah.
That it's not. And it's like, okay, yeah, if I'm going to sell now at 2 million pesos, guess what? I have a 9 million.
That's
capital gain.
That's a brutal amount.
But,
but precisely because of that, we need to bring up to date the amounts of everything, and every factor counts. The number of people that are selling, are you guys residents? Are you not residents? Do you have anything that can be deducted, like the real estate commissions, improvements, whatever that you have on that? It always helps. Everything sums.
Everything counts.
Yeah. And yeah, I think on the sellers, we should be very mindful and try to keep them protected. Try to make sure that the business that they're trying to do, it's actually profitable.
Yeah.
A number, you have no idea. I mean, we're all in the same business, but I think a number of times we've seen clients that think they're going to receive, 300,000 in gain because they bought pre-construction when it was a bit cheaper, precisely because they're trusting in the process of construction, and sell a couple of years later, and surprise, you have a big gain, and half of that amount is going to be cut from your gain. So where was the business? So yeah, I know you guys are professionals and you always take care of that before listing properties. But yeah, for whoever is listening that actually is going to think and sell a property, contact them, contact us, contact your notary, your legal advisor of trust, and make sure that you are well aware how your numbers are going to be at the end.
Yeah, it's best to know how things are going to look up front rather than being surprise months from now.
Nasty surprise.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much, Zaria, for being today and for all the great value that you brought us to all the listener and also for us. And yeah, if you want to share more about your organization and what you do for all the foreigners that comes here, not only for the legal aspect of living here in Mexico, if you can share more, it would be great.
So me and my business partner, Fernando Todd, have a legal concierge. The name of our company is Olasai Legal Services. We don't see each other merely as a law firm. And as I told you, it's a concierge because we're trying to provide all the services that you might need being a foreigner moving to Mexico. What is this? From, of course, all the legal for your purchase, but also we have a team of immigration lawyers, litigation lawyers that we are hoping not to use very often. But we also have topographers, architects, people that works on interior design, everything that you might need, especially coming from a reliable source. People that are very focused on foreigners, in the treatment of foreigners, that we are dedicated to this. I love that our teamwork and our alliances have and share the same core values. And well, we are always looking forward to help. I think that's what moves us in this business. If you're not in this to serve, well, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate so much finding professionals like you guys. I know we always do such a great team when we have the opportunity to collaborate. And well, yeah, I'm here to help. We're here to help. And again, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you, Zara. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining Francesco and I. And we'll have Zaira's information in the link below. And we'll also have Francesco and I's information as well if you want to contact us with any more questions or anything like that about buying property in Mexico. We're happy to help. And we're going to be doing some more videos like this, so stay tuned for more. Thanks.
And if you have any topics that you want to know more about, leave it in the comments.
Leave it in the comments.
Anything you want to know, let us know. There are your guys.
Awesome. Thanks for that.